emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and,
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 330.JB1810, certificate number 36728. The DeLorean cocaine bust.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
So for people of our generation, the DeLorean needs no introduction. But for futurelings, maybe they only know the DeLorean one way.
But are you going to say Back to the Future?
Yeah.
Are you going to say a DeLorean has visited them from 1985?
It's entirely possible that they've seen the DeLorean flying through the sky.
It's the only car they've ever seen actually running instead of just the Hulks out on the wasteland.
They're flying all around. They're probably, DeLoreans have been like taken apart, reverse engineered, and are being manufactured in 2240. Or whatever.
Well, the funny thing is, even as
I never saw those later movies.
What, you did?
The Cowboy one or whatever.
It's got the three great kinds of time space adventure. It's got the past.
You go have sex with your own mom.
Man's past, man's future.
Right.
And cowboy hijinks.
Yeah. The three.
It's like they realized they were only two directions in time, and we've already done past and future. Okay, cowboys, I guess.
Somehow, when Back to the Future came out, I was the target audience for it, right? I mean, I was almost exactly the age that Marty McFly was pretending to be when the movie came out, and it was a fun romp.
You also wondered how attractive your mom was in her youth.
And I was like, did Peggy Sue get married? I mean, all those mid-'80s boomer fantasies about their own childhoods that were...
They're supposedly about young people, but
right.
Really they're about growing up in the 50s.
Yeah, they were dressed up to appeal to us 80s kids, but it was really like, sock hops! We get to go back. We movie directors get to go back home. But by the time Back to the Future 2 came out, I had aged out of the franchise. I was just the wrong age for it to feel like, Back to the Future. And it wasn't that many years that separated them.
No, it's just a couple years later, right?
But by then, I think I was probably 17 and couldn't be bothered with these dumb kid movies. And I only watched it for the first time 3 weeks ago. My daughter insisted on seeing Back to the Future 2 because she'd enjoyed Back to the Future 1.
Kids love those movies. My kids have seen those movies more times than any movie of their generation, I think.
But I couldn't believe how bad Back to the Future 2 was.
I disagree.
Oh, it was just excruciating.
No.
You think it's great?
Yeah. It's not a well-constructed confection like the first one is,
right.
But I enjoyed it very much.
But it's just all like nut punching and stuff. I just felt like the jokes were no good. Am I wrong? Do I need to go watch it? Do I need to watch this terrible movie again just to figure out where you're coming from?
I like the complicated. Like I don't know if I don't know what the jokes are that crack me up. It's true. It does. Yeah. It must be less quotable.
Yeah.
Than the first one, since I can't really think of any of the great lines. But I think it's just a very serious, convoluted time travel comedy. Like in a way, the first one isn't. You know, it actually pushes the premise of the first one further, which is what I want to see in a sequel.
Right. I've never seen the cowboy one, so I have to guess that it's what, the best of the three or the worst of the three?
No, I think it's generally held to be. There's some revisionism now that's coming out in favor of Back to the Future 2, which everyone hated for decades.
But Back to the Future 2 was not liked?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, interesting.
But the third one is kind of just a genial, it's just fine, but inessential kind of a thing.
Right. Like Will Smith's Wild Wild West, a thing that you don't need to see.
Exactly.
But that was fun at the time.
It has ZZ Top in it.
Oh, I like ZZ Top.
But not Crispin Glover. That's the problem with the sequels is no Crispin Glover.
Oh, right.
He was so nuts.
He was like edited in and there was a lawsuit about it, right?
There was, yeah. They kind of... They have to dispose of his character and have Michael J. Fox play all of his male ancestors instead of where it should be Crispin Glover.
Well, the funny thing about the use of the DeLorean in Back to the Future is that it absolutely enshrined the car as the kind of the ne plus ultra of 80s autos.
Well, by the way, I think even in 2020, the DeLorean would be largely forgotten. It would be kind of a Carson punchline among non-car people, among the general populace, if not for Back to the Future. Like now they know, this was kind of the cool Corvette of that year or whatever, which you would not have if not for Back to the Future.
But even in its moment, even in its time, by the time Back to the Future came out, the DeLorean company was already insolvent. The DeLorean itself was already a cultural punchline.
That's funny because it had been chosen for its futuristic qualities.
Right.
And by the time the movie comes out, it's the opposite of that. It's a relic.
When they were first writing Back to the Future, the initial time machine was supposed to just be a laser beam on a like a sawhorse.
It was a mad scientist's gimmick.
And it wasn't, there wasn't enough to it. And so they built to sustain, the plot or to make interesting vignettes. And so their second iteration was they made a time machine in a refrigerator.
Now that's interesting.
And they climbed into the refrigerator. And then someone pointed out that hundreds of kids would die of suffocation playing Back to the Future.
Well, that is a way to travel to the future.
Interesting. You get into a refrigerator
you
and
die, and you're found weeks later. It's fun. Kids of the future, there's probably refrigerators littering the wasteland as well. Nowadays, it's not a problem. Did you know that
they fixed it somehow that you can't get locked inside a refrigerator?
Yeah, you can't get locked inside a fridge.
Why? How did they fix it?
Oh, I think it was just a matter of they used to latch
they
on the outside.
From the outside.
I think
that's right. And now, right. I
so
always wondered
this hasn't been a problem for decades.
How hard would it be to get out of a refrigerator?
Kids climb in all the refrigerators you want. It's easy. It's fun. A mere push on the door part of the fridge will get you back out into the non-suffocating world.
It's true. Those old ones do have like that latch that clicks. Why would you need to seal it?
They haven't invented whatever the spongy stuff now that makes a fridge go satisfyingly.
Yeah, they didn't
when
have
it's closed.
The satisfying thunk.
By the way, we have a fridge freezer where we just put stuff and forget about it. So I'm sure it's got Costco bacon from 2009 or whatever.
Right. Side of beef.
Some lasagna we got when my daughter was born. And the other day I walked into the garage and just walked over to a shelf and realized I had just stepped through a puddle of something. And we found out that, during a very hot week, the freezer had been left open, like a tarp had gotten stuck in the squishy part of the door.
And it thawed everything.
It had thawed everything in the fridge. So we were, the first thing you do is you check your X-Men comics, and it turned out that none of my X-Men comics were wet.
Okay.
You know what you do.
Whew.
I know you can breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
Second thing we did is make sure, see how much of the food we had to throw away. And it was like all the blackberries I picked last year.
Oh,
boo.
They'll
never be a
bad.
compliment. Yeah, but they were like dripping black goo all over the rest of the stuff.
You're right.
We kept all the stuff that seemed like, you know what? This
pork didn't go all the way unfrozen.
It was more like this smoked salmon is still vacuum sealed, and what could happen to smoked salmon? But
right.
We threw away a lot of goopy food, and I had to squeegee a lot of blackberry gunk off the floor of the garage. So that squishy shunk stuff, maybe you do need a latch.
I mean, for your in-garage freezer, yeah. Maybe what you should do, and this is why kids don't get into refrigerators, because your friends might put a cinder block on top of it as a joke. And then in that case,
and if you're the kind of weak kid who's going to be victimized by this kind of prank, you can't push over a cinder block.
That's right. It's a perfect storm.
When you were growing up, this is very off topic, sorry. Did you have a fridge in the garage just for soda?
No, but there was a time. So when I was in high school, we did have a chest freezer because at some point
your dad started murdering drifters.
No, this was my mom's house. In 6th grade, I won a side of beef in a raffle.
Oh, right. I've heard this.
Yeah. And so we ended up.
So you had to buy a freezer?
Well,
this prize cost you hundreds of dollars.
And then my mom's boyfriend at the time was an avid fisherman. And so we always had these giant Alaskan salmon that now, if you ordered one in a Seattle restaurant, these salmon would be worth $900. But at the time, you could just
walk out on the beach and grab a 35-pound salmon with your hands.
You were just stacking them outside trying to find a place to put them. So our freezer was always full of salmon.
I guess there's a Midwestern thing of having a soda fridge.
And I'm thinking in my new house that I will have both a freezer in the garage and a soda fridge in the basement because why not? Money is free.
When we bought our house, it had a wine fridge, and we don't drink, but we almost repurposed it as a kimchi fridge because
make your own. Leave it in there cooking.
I don't know if you actually want a slightly a higher temperature for kimchi the way you do for wine, but I know one thing you do is you want to keep it away from anything else because anything else you put in with your kimchi in your fridge will taste like kimchi like 1 millisecond later.
I can imagine you selling the house and there's a sign on it that's like, don't open the wine fridge. It's a kimchi fridge now.
Cursed.
And it will make your wine taste like kimchi.
So it's not a refrigerator in the movie anymore.
No, then they thought, and what's crazy is to think that they made Back to the Future and that the original scripts would not have had all of those gags about cars.
Well, think about how the whole third act is about. You can't propel a refrigerator into a lightning blast, can you?
I mean, the car is the whole movie in a way, and so it must have inspired a real script revision when they settled on a car.
But think how happy they were not to just have a static refrigerator sitting connected by a cable to the clock tower in the middle of Hill Valley Main Street.
And it would have been an old style refrigerator with a locking door.
That's right.
I think Mustang offered Zemeckis like a ton of money to use a Mustang, and he was like, "No, not on your life."
Why not?
Well, I don't know, because he took every other dollar offered to him by Coke and
Pepsi. All of Pepsi's revenue in 1985 went to product placement in Back to the Future.
But somehow he felt like a Mustang was not, and it might have been because the mid 80s Mustangs were so cheap looking. But no, he wanted a DeLorean, and
because of the look of the DeLorean.
Because it was so futuristic, but also I think if you look at RoboCop now. When RoboCop came out, they had access to all of those, what at the time would have been not yet released Ford Tauruses and Chevy Caprices that were part of that school of auto design where the car just looked like a lozenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so those cars, their cinematic debut was in RoboCop, which was set in the very near future.
And at the time, people would have thought, look at these cars of tomorrow.
Right. And it really was effective, especially when those cars started very shortly thereafter showing up on the streets.
I like when you see a prototype car in a movie pretending to be an electric car of the next 10 years.
I do too. And the challenge is in the Woody Allen movie Sleeper, there are a bunch of cars from the future, but they're clearly golf carts that have tinfoil on them. And the illusion is kind of ruined when you can't, because a car wants to look like a solid mass-produced thing. Nobody's hand-making cars in the future.
You can tell they never have enough of them, right?
Right.
You'll often see, the hero driving one, but, the cars he's driving past in the background will be kind of blurry, just Honda Accords.
Yeah, and golf carts covered with refrigerator boxes. But so the DeLorean had, it had a lot of solidity, and it felt like a future car, even in the mid 80s when we already learned that the DeLorean was a bad car, or if not a bad car, at least
a curio.
A curio, and in a way, part of the failure of DeLorean the failure of the car was that although it looked very fast and looked very luxurious and sporty, John DeLorean himself had tried to make it a car in one way tried to make it a people's car. His initial idea was that they would be not affordable, but but priced like a Corvette, priced like an American car.
So you can put your family in it?
Well, no, but so that everybody could have access to a supercar. But in order to accomplish that, in the manufacturing of it, they ended up going with an engine made by Renault, who have made some fast cars in their day. You know, Renault is pretty famous for some of their rally cars, but this wasn't the fast motor, and so the car had no real. It was not well made, and it was.
Have you ever driven one?
There was a time on the American market where you could find a used DeLorean for about $12,000, and I remember. It's not like I ever had $12,000 to spend on a car, including now, but there was a time when I thought I should buy a DeLorean now
because you thought it was going to go up.
Just one day, they only made a handful of these. It can't possibly not be worth money now, or not be worth money one day. What I've discovered is that they're only worth money to Back to the Future reenactors.
Oh, interesting.
You see them in the world, but they're almost always dressed up. They're almost always cosplaying now.
We saw, I've walked down, it was near Times Square, so it must have been like 46th Street or something, just to see a DeLorean parked by the side of the street with a bunch of eager Chinese tourists taking pictures with it. And it was clearly there cosplaying. But I've also just seen here by the Seattle Center in town, like I don't know where we were going, but we passed 5 or 6 DeLoreans all headed the same direction. And we realized
it's a car club.
That there's some kind of, Back to the Future parade going on.
I think if you see an Avanti on the street, it's still rarer than a DeLorean. But
how many were made?
Avantis or DeLoreans?
Well, DeLoreans. I don't know.
I think the final run of DeLoreans was 9,000 cars, but not all of them sold at the time. In fact, I think at the bankruptcy of the DeLorean company, only half had sold.
So were some just junked?
There's a famous picture of a loading dock in Ireland that's just a sea of unsold DeLoreans.
Oh yeah, they were made in Ireland.
That's part of
for tax reasons, I guess.
Well, part of the trick of the DeLorean company was that the British government gave £100 million to the building and the whole setup of the DeLorean auto.
That is a pretty good trick.
It's a pretty good
trick. Anyone who can do that trick has solved every problem in their life, right? If you can solve the get £300 million from the government trick.
You would think that would be enough. It wasn't enough for the DeLorean company.
Apparently that only gives you 2 years of running a vanity car company.
Yeah, getting the $100 million incentive was a real coup for DeLorean, and it seemed like a coup for the UK government at the time. This was
to bring in jobs, or
this was a sort of Thatcher era jobs incentive. Build the auto plant in Northern Ireland, and this is hot in the middle of the Troubles, right? So this was a time when Northern Ireland was really impoverished, and when the UK claim to Northern Ireland was under its sort of greatest scrutiny. Mm-hmm. And to build this factory and provide what would have been thousands and what were thousands of jobs to the Irish there, it seemed like a win-win situation for Thatcher, for the conservative government at the time. And what happened was, in fact, the Troubles kind of made their way even into the DeLorean plant. There were work slowdowns. A bomb went off. There was a lot of the quality control that ended up being a problem for the company was not connected to the difficulty there. The violence and the kind of the fact that the DeLorean company was seen as a government intrusion.
Right. Like what an obvious target if you want to, target the loyalist government of Britain.
Right.
You've got a brand new factory right there.
But the $100 million was not enough to prop up the company, largely because John DeLorean was not a good car company owner operator. And it's funny because John DeLorean was an incredibly good car designer and car company executive. And so
Where'd he come from? He was a Pontiac or something.
So
right?
DeLorean was a kid kind of born in poverty to immigrant parents. His parents had come from what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Specifically, his father was from a place in Romania, kind of right in a very little and impoverished town in the Central Carpathians. His mom was also sort of this Austro-Hungarian Empire generation.
But he has this amazing name, DeLorean.
Which is, I think, when you think of Austro-Hungary, you think of it as being German-Hungarian, but of course, Romania is a Latin country, and the Romanian language is a Latin language, not a Germanic or Slavic language. So
DeLorean's a legit Romanian name, huh?
It would have been probably DeLoreanescu, but it would not be. It's not pretension to have it sound like a very Mediterranean.
I've
name.
never had a cool sounding name, but it must just haunt your dreams. It must do so much for you if your name is DeLorean. And if you're working for General Motors, you're thinking, you know what would be a better name for a car company than General Motors? DeLorean. Like there is no reason I should be laboring under somebody else's worst brand.
Well, and it's such a great 70s name because the 70s were full of names like DeLorean. Like Ralph Lauren is almost a homonym. But also DeLorean was tailor-made for the 70s. He had all the qualities of a Bond villain early in the movie before you realize he's the villain. When there's some rakish character
he's
in
just
a Bond
playing
film,
polo
oh, hello, Mr. Bond,
or Baccarat or something.
Welcome to my car company, and then the Bombay doors open and you realize
there's a missile under the assembly line.
It's a submarine. But John DeLorean was the kind of classic American story of a gifted kid that came from an impoverished background that sort of excelled in his local schools and got a scholarship and went, didn't get a scholarship to MIT, got a scholarship to the local technical college. But it turned out that during that period, his father got a job as working for Ford at a time when his dad was uneducated and alcoholic and got a pretty menial job working for Ford. But the local schools were all pipelines to the Ford Motor Company or pipelines to Detroit. And so the local technical college turned out to be a technical college that was producing
that's interesting.
All the great car designers.
All those kids got really great educations.
Yeah.
Because all the courses were like car centric.
Yeah, right. I mean, you could get degrees in like automotive design, like transmission design. And DeLorean was gifted and excelled in those programs and sort of entered the auto world as a sort of local boy, right? But because he was really good and worked hard and was good at engineering, he very quickly kind of rose up the internal ladder. First at Chrysler, then he went to Packard, and then was kind of cherry picked away to GM. And he was a classic engineer, somebody that developed a new innovation on a transmission that nobody at Packard had conceived of, that all of a sudden his new transmission was kind of like Packard's, and he's in his 20s.
Wow.
And it's like this selling point for the new Packard. And so when he was brought to GM, he was already kind of a golden boy, young guy. And this was at a time when the corporate culture in America, but also in Detroit, was pretty buttoned down, pretty square, crew cut.
And was he...
Well, he was pretty square and crew cut, but his name was DeLorean, and he was a hot dog, and then he really made his name not just at GM but in America by effectively building the first muscle car. He's the guy who said, why don't we take this mid-level, kind of entry-level trim Pontiac Tempest that's, a light-bodied, mid-sized sedan that like a salesman might drive, and we're just going to shoehorn a big V8 in it and basically do nothing else. We're just going to drop a giant. It's like we're going to drop a giant engine into this.
Is that right? Is
economy car?
So the GTO is just it's got it's a lightweight economy car with
a giant motor,
and that's
and
one
it's
of the
not.
reasons.
And the thing is, it wasn't even the giantest motor at the time. He just put in a V8. He put in a big motor. The muscle car wars that he ignited with that in the early '60s ended up with lightweight, mid-sized economy cars that had obscenely big motors, and that basically invented the genre of the 1960s murder ballad, or the 1960s car crash ballad, because these cars just were.
Because he murdered so many. Because now teens thought it was more fun to drive.
Well, it was the difference between the American conception of a sports car and the European conception of a sports car. European sports cars, all through the 50s and 60s, the premise was, sure, have a hot tuned motor, but the car needs to be fast through the corners. And so the cars were small and light, and the motors were small displacement, because European roads have turns in them. American roads, especially in the 50s and 60s, were built.
There's nothing in the way.
Yeah, like let's make this 6 lanes wide and straight as an arrow. And so American muscle cars were, let's put the biggest motor in it as you can, and then don't worry about turns.
This is going to be a dumb question, I've wondered this since I was a kid. But what is the thing sticking up on the hood of a GTO? I've always wondered that.
Well, so in order to
intake,
a lot of the performance that you would get out of those motors was, and this became an issue later when GM kind of banned the practice. But initially, what they did was put more than one carburetor on top of the motor. Like, what we need to do is get gas and air into this motor faster and in larger quantities. So let's just put a second carburetor. Let's put a third carburetor up there. And those carburetors sticking up out of the top of the motor, if you've got a bunch of carburation, and especially if you've got a blower, which is a device that then spins up that air and pushes it down, kind of like a turbo, that's going to sit up on top of the engine block, and you're going to need to cut a little space out for the air to get in.
On those early GTOs, it's so high, it must be in driver's sight line, I think.
Yeah, sure. You're looking at an early GTO. Show me the picture that you're looking at.
Is this modified? I know they're not all this big, but
yeah. So that's a modification. And what they discovered in those early cars was that if your carburetor was sucking so much air into these big motors that it could actually create a thing called vapor lock, which was that it had created a vacuum under the hood of the car, and it couldn't get enough air, couldn't get air in enough fast enough, and the motors would bog down because they weren't, because they didn't have intakes, and that area under the hood they could suck air so fast that it's not like those are closed systems, right? Air can come in under the wheels or whatever, but it just
not enough.
That little space between the top of the air cleaner and the hood, the inside of the hood, wasn't enough. But the GTO was a huge hit, and it inspired all the automakers to get into this game of putting big motors in small cars, and made DeLorean kind of a star. And this was an era that we talk about a lot in our culture now, the mid-'60s car culture, like car manufacturing, car customizing, car racing. It was a big subculture in the United States, and one that kind of pervaded. Americans had always had an interest and fascination in cars, and in the 50s,
but not as a powerful performance thing. They started out as kind of a mechanics tinkering hobby,
and a place of luxury. All the different brands were established as like, this is more luxurious than that, and if you want this, you get that. But the idea of a car being a macho hot rod symbol of speed and power,
thrill ride.
And so DeLorean was in charge of Pontiac, and he was the one that turned Pontiac into GM's kind of performance division. And he then was behind the production of the Firebird, which became, kind of legendary 1970s, late 60s and 1970s performance car, culminating in first the Bandit, his Trans Am in Smokey and the Bandit was a Firebird, and then maybe for your generation, Ken.
Are you going to say the General Lee?
No, that was not a Firebird or a Pontiac. No, I was going to say Knight Rider. Kit from Knight Rider.
Kit is also a Trans Am.
Yeah. But so DeLorean by the late 60s had kind of turned everything that had ever been handed to him to gold. Whenever he was promoted into a new job, he succeeded in turning that part of the car company around, not only turning it around, but creating a new car, a new idea that made him a star. And he was the toast of Detroit at a time when Detroit was on top of the world. And
you remember that time in the 70s and 80s when car executives were on the covers of Time and Newsweek all the time, and Iacocca could sell like 30 million copies of an autobiography.
Right.
Like, you knew the names of car executives, which is hard to imagine now.
You did, and in the swinging 60s, in the late 60s, when that buttoned down corporate culture was under assault from 3 or 4 different directions, DeLorean became one of the first major executives that you would see walking around in an open-collared suit, hobnobbing with celebrities. He was friends with Sammy Davis. He would go on the Carson show. He was
before then. It would be more like an aircraft company vibe, right?
Yeah, right.
Quasi-military slide rule kind of a thing,
and pocket protectors and whatnot. And he had the engineering chops, but he was part of the Playboy culture at the time. And John DeLorean was married 4 times, and I think 3 of those times to women in their early 20s, even though he continued to get older.
They stayed the same age.
And he was one of the first kind of documented celebrity men to have plastic surgery.
Oh, interesting.
And his plastic surgery was to augment the squareness of his jaw.
And this was something he was happy to tell people
No,
about.
I don't think so. But it was it was somewhat widely known, or at least, yeah. He was handsome, rakish. Especially as he got into his 40s and 50s, he had that wonderful white-haired, dark eyebrows.
With dark
look.
eyebrows, like they don't make those anymore.
It's such a Bond villain vibe.
I assume a lot of these people are coloring their eyebrows who do that.
I don't know. I mean, not ever having had eyebrows and sitting across from you here in eyebrowless.
That's the rule. You can't have eyebrows that come in here.
You can't be on the omnibus program if you walk in here with eyebrows.
There's a little retina scanner by the door that goes boop, 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 but it just looks at your eyebrows.
He's got eyebrows. We could each take one of his eyebrows and split them up and have.
He's got eyebrows all
twice
day.
The eyebrows we each have,
and he knows how to use them. But I just feel like facial hair often comes in grayer or lighter than the hair on your head. So I'm skeptical of these dark eyebrowed men. Maybe that's just my jealousy talking.
It's a thing. I think if you go back to the old country, it's
oh yeah, he's from the Carpathian Mountains.
Yeah,
he can turn into a bat.
That's exactly what it is. It's a kind of vampirism that's rampant in Transylvania.
That's why all the young women too.
That's right. He's feeding on their blood. By the late 60s, the problems that were piling up against the auto industry started to come to a head, and we're talking about after the the famous kind of Ralph Nader assault on the Corvair, which really, whether or not the Corvair actually was unsafe at any speed, it was the first kind of public doubt cast upon the automakers that not only were the cars not as well made as they said, but Detroit itself was in a conspiracy against the American people,
covering it up.
And then we entered into an era of corporate cost cutting, and then the energy crisis, and then the congressional sort of mandate about pollution and a switch to unleaded gas, and all of this stacked up to land on the American automakers in the early 70s, 72 or thereabouts. And prior to that, it was the Wild West. You could put as much gas in these cars as you wanted. You could drive them however you wanted.
It's the American way.
And the writing was on the wall in 70, 71. It didn't all maybe come crashing down until later, or until 72. But DeLorean's last, he had risen to the top of, he was in the loftiest heights of General Motors at this point. He'd been given control of Chevrolet, their major, I mean, the major
big brand
component of GM. And he was the one that invented the Vega, which became in my lifetime, at least for many years, the Vega was one of those ultimate auto punchlines, a cheaply made, flimsy rust bucket of an economy car. General Motors' attempt to compete with the Japanese with some little flaky piece of garbage. But in fact, the Vega, if you look at the Vega in 1970, 71, when they were developing the Vega, it was going to be a absolutely super cool little car.
I guess it was the Motor Trend car of the year it came out, before all the problems were known.
It looks like a small little Camaro. It was going to be a performance car. It was going to be a people's car, and DeLorean was behind it. And then GM, and it's not only the classic American story, but it's also the classic American corporate apologia. It's sort of like we didn't lose the Vietnam War. It was those hippies in Congress. But what happened at General Motors was the cost cutters came in and gutted the quality control and gutted
Just killed by committee.
That's right. Gutted the power of the unions. And this was the dawn of the death of Detroit. And the Vega became a punchline. And DeLorean realized that a combination of his actual success, his celebrity, and his perceived business acumen caused him to believe that he had a better way.
I'm a cool guy in a turtleneck, and I can get investors. It's the confidence of the tall, handsome man.
That's right. The tall, handsome man who knows Johnny Carson and who is already a millionaire himself.
He's got a closet full of identical mustard turtlenecks, and he's good to go.
DeLorean during this period was being paid an astronomical amount of money, which is to say $200,000.
Oh, my goodness.
Big money.
Think of all the waterbeds you could buy.
I mean, a top man. Only the top men got $250,000.
Can you imagine a time when executives would get that kind of exorbitant payment?
I mean, crazy to think about.
I mean, today they're working 1,000 times harder.
Sure. So, of course, they're worth $20 million a year. Yeah. But at the time, the guy that developed the GTO, the Camaro, he was, $200,000. And that was a lot of money at the time, for sure. It was the equivalent of a couple of $1 million a year, but certainly nothing.
In 1970, no, it won't be that much.
To $1.5 million a year.
No.
$250,000 a year?
It's going to be 6 digits. He's making like $500,000 in modern day.
Let's see. You put it into your function machine.
What year are we saying?
Let's say, let me get this actual figure for you. DeLorean salary 1970. Oh. I'm sorry.
Did he get a raise?
He was making $200,000
Around 1970?
around 1970.
Oh no, you're right. It's upwards of $1 million.
Upwards of $1 million. $1 million and more.
That's kind of eye-opening.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Because we often talk about how corporate salaries have gone crazy and point to a figure like that, $200,000. But even so, John DeLorean, as head of Chevrolet, getting paid $1 million too.
I guess it's just ahead of the 70s era inflation. Like if you're making $200,000 in 1980, that's what I'm picturing, and that's only
$400,000.
Yeah, that's like $600,000.
Yeah. Right. That would have been a ton of money. I mean, this is at a time when I think when my mom divorced my dad, she was making what? $8,000 a year? I remember when she was making, I can remember her making $14,000 a year and feeling like, wow, my mom's making 14.
Getting to five
grand.
figures was bank.
So DeLorean leaves General Motors and on pretty good terms. He's going to go out and start his own car company. This is in about 1973. He kind of loses his way for a while.
Well, he must if that's a decade before the DMC DeLorean.
Yeah, he for a while. The different sources of the John DeLorean story, they all seem to have one or another part of the picture. But there's so much mythology around him, and mythology that clearly was true at the time. You know, like people are referring back to sources, and the sources in 1972 were maybe not telling the whole story. DeLorean became the president of the National Alliance of Businessmen, which was a kind of
sounds fake.
It is sort of fake, but it was a charitable organization that wanted to get jobs for people in need. It was a jobs program.
Got it. That's why you can't tax the rich.
That's why you can't tax the rich. But it was 100% a kind of like auto industry cutseling up to the Johnson administration. Like, hey, I know the Johnson and LBJ wants to create a great society.
You guys will throw cash at problems, right?
Yeah, and Henry Ford too is right here, like high-fiving white guys. And so one version of the story is the DeLorean left Chevy and became the president pro bono of the National Alliance of Businessmen and was working for free during this period.
He took $1 a year, which today would be $13. That's not right.
But what actually happened was that GM agreed to continue to pay his salary, his $200,000 a year plus bonuses, while he headed the National Alliance of Businessmen. And I don't know whether that was just to keep him from going to Ford or whether the National Alliance of Businessmen was selling Stinger missiles to the Contras.
That's a good gig, though. I would do that job.
For sure.
That's my new dream. I want $200,000 a year just to chair some industry advisory group.
What I'm hoping is that that the Omnibus Project will continue to pay me to go be like a figurehead of a nonprofit somewhere.
You just want to stop doing the podcast and just hope the Patreon stays up there?
Yeah, and not stop doing the podcast so much as transition to a job where
fact-finding trips overseas.
Yeah, that's right, exactly right. So DeLorean, goes through the 70s, kind of putting together this group of investors, and DeLorean himself was a part investor in the San Diego Chargers. He was a part owner of the New York Yankees during a time when, the Yankees sold to that George Steinbrenner group for $10 million. Can
you imagine?
1970, whatever. $10 million. The Yankees spend that on socks now. And the Chargers too. So he was one of these guys that was part of the just general American culture of rich people that were all investing in each other's things.
And it's early for that kind of fun plaything wealth. Let's buy a sports team.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's start a vanity car company.
I was talking to Hefner the other day, and he said that he's putting some money into this offshore thing, and so he was a fun guy. He was in the society pages, and he was able to get people to invest money in his sort of nascent sports car program, and by all accounts, he was going to knock it out of the park. This guy had never failed. So he puts DeLorean together. He gets all of the best minds. He has the. Speaking of James Bond, you remember was it The Spy Who Loved Me? That Lotus Esprit
that goes underwater. Yeah,
that goes underwater. That was designed by an Italian car designer named Giorgetto Giugiaro.
The real Lotus Esprit was, or just the Bond submarine was?
No, the real Lotus Esprit. And you can really see the echoes of that design in the DeLorean.
I mean, it's not stainless steel, but
a completely flat hood. I mean, it's designed as a shard.
Yeah.
He got him to design the DeLorean. He got he had it made out of stainless steel, so it wasn't going to rust. But also, he didn't need to paint it. The gull wing doors were a cool 70s custom car affectation that you were going to see later in Lamborghinis and whatnot, but it was a thing that made it appear to be a supercar.
There's something about the DeLorean today that does not make it look like the Lotus Esprit. To me, still looks more like a classic Tomorrowland future car than the DeLorean, and I'm not sure what it is about the design. Is it the?
It's the General Motor. No, it's the General Motors quad square headlights.
Yeah, that's true. It's all.
If you think about it, like
I'm covering the headlights, and you're right. It did just get like 20% fancier.
Those quad headlights end up being on the Chevy Caprice. They end up being
all these classic concentration cars.
Yeah, if you look at just the headlights, it looks like an Audi 5000S. It looks like it does. It looks like a Chevy Citation, and it's just that square or that rectangular quad headlight thing in 1979 or 8. Would have been pretty forward, but by 1982, all the car companies were using it.
It's also, there's no real attempt at conveying the future through or speed through curves. No. I guess what you want is he's trying to convey the muscularity of the rectangle. And as a result, the car is too trapezoidal for the future. The trapezoid's not going to be with us in the future. Trapezoids are barely hanging in there today.
And one of the things about a car like this that if you're going to make it look like a shard, it can't also feel kind of fat and heavy. And it does. It does because he's trying
It's got a station wagon vibe in the back.
Yeah, it's a little bit thick but not small. It's thick but not small.
It's a thick boy.
But he gets this money from the Northern Ireland Development Agency. He starts to build a factory. The factory employed 2,000 people in Ireland.
1,000 Protestants, 1,000 Catholics, all trying to blow each
all
other
just
up.
Blowing each other up in the bathrooms. It was in all the Time magazines at the time. He was still, John DeLorean was in a Cuddy Sark whiskey ad. It was
there hadn't been a new car company in decades, right?
And especially not one that was trying to mate the European aesthetic with the American affordability and that sense of this was just before the Pride was back. This was when the Pride was in the dumper.
There is no Pride.
But the idea Americans were starting to buy European and Japanese cars in profusion. And this was going to kind of be the best of both worlds. It was an American car guy building a European car.
And the gull-wing door really is, you're tired of your little economy Chevy Vegas.
Right.
It's the same appeal as all the features on the Tesla today. Of course you'll pay, $50,000 more for this car. The door handles go in a little bit. It's that kind of a thing. This is a toy.
But it was clear kind of by the time the car made it to market, problems in just supply chain and in ramping up a new car company meant that he was going to have to sell it for probably twice what he'd initially priced it at. Or if not twice, like he thought he was going to get in there at the $12,000 level, and then it was $18,000, and pretty soon it was $24,000, which was at the time a lot of money to pay for a car. A Corvette was, you could get a hot Corvette for $18,000, and and this car was not that hot.
So now it's very much a luxury statement to buy this car, and it's not that good a car.
A flash statement, right? I mean, they put American Express had a branded American Express version of the DeLorean, which was gold plated, that sold for some like stupid amount of money, and they thought they were going to sell enough of them to make that not seem really stupid, and I think they ended up selling 4.
Did it only come in that one color, apart from
stainless steel? Yeah,
apart from the gold.
It came in any color you wanted, as long as it was silver. But the company was on the rocks, losing, like hemorrhaging money, and by the car didn't itself come out until 1981, and by 1982, it was $175 million in debt. And DeLorean was running out of money. He was out of money and was not able to put together that next round of funding. The British government was livid at what they saw. You know, they'd put all this money in there, and it was...
You could just flush it down the loo.
Yeah, it was not saving Northern Ireland, which would have been nice.
Northern Ireland was eventually saved. Maybe.
Northern Ireland now.
Did DeLorean take credit?
I mean, it
took a decade, but
it's the gem in the crown of Ireland. It's the crown of Ireland.
Don't say that to Ireland.
I don't think they think of it that way.
Yeah, you're going to get the
crown of Ireland.
Letters.
Why do people not talk about it that way? It's the ventricle of Ireland.
Americans can't get into that because that would make Canada the crown of North America, and we can't get behind that.
It's a crown bigger than the head itself.
It's just something for the northernmost people to use. Like, I'm sure the Scottish and the Norwegians love
being the crown
talk.
But like Mexico doesn't quite like being
we're the crown of Central America.
We're the drawers of North America.
That's all you frame it. It's the crown of Central America.
So DeLorean the world was crashing down around him, and this was before Back to the Future. So Back to the Future came too late to rescue the car company. But
ironic.
But now we get to the meat of the issue, which was, how are we going to rescue the DeLorean car company if we're John DeLorean? All of a sudden, his name and face are splashed across the newspapers of the world for a very different reason. For the first time, John DeLorean displays a chink in his armor, and it's a considerable one in that he was arrested by the FBI for conspiracy to sell or to import and distribute large quantities of cocaine.
What's a large quantity of cocaine?
Well, this is another thing that kind of varies depending on the source that you read. There was actually 59 pounds of cocaine involved in the actual transaction. But
that is a lot.
But it is a lot.
That's like a Webster and a half, to use the 80s unit.
But it was a transaction that was promised to be 220 pounds. Now, in 80s dollars, 220 pounds of cocaine was worth $24 million. Let's see what 200 pounds of cocaine is worth today.
Oh, you're calling somebody. Who are you calling here, John? No, you're Googling.
Hi, friend. Hey, ding, 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 ding.
I'm here doing the podcast, and Ken and I have a quick question.
What do you say? Well, it looks like the current going rate, according to infallible internet website Quora. Well, see, this person's talking about cocaine that's been cut with rat poison.
You don't want that.
No.
That's what killed Bernard Furster.
All right, exactly. So what are they saying? $80 a gram is the current rate? Yeah, I'm sure there are futurelings listening who are thinking, I know the exact price of cocaine.
What do you want, 220 pounds?
220 pounds of cocaine. Ken, you're good at using the internet.
Well, I mean, that's about 100,000 grams.
100,000
so
grams.
80 of those would be $8 million?
So the price of cocaine is actually, and this is what I was kind of discovering looking here, the price of cocaine has actually come down.
It's a great time to buy, listeners. I'm Jim Cramer, and I'm ringing my buy bell for cocaine.
This 59 pounds that he, so So DeLorean was, and the story as it wrung out over the course of a couple of years of court proceedings.
So he was arrested. He was
arrested in a hotel room with this cocaine and an FBI informant and an FBI agent. And the informant was a man by the name of James Timothy Hoffman, who was a drug dealer and had been caught and busted by the FBI and was being used in the style of the time
to get bigger fish.
To get bigger fish. And this was a popular method that the FBI was employing to fight the mafia during this era, right? Get a guy on the inside and then see who you can snare. But it was in the immediate aftermath of the Abscam sting operation that actually took down a U.S. senator. All sort of post-Watergate FBI. Now, we see the FBI using this technique a lot in the post-9/11 years to snare terrorists.
Bigger and bigger terrorists, right?
And the FBI is always on the edge of being accused of entrapment, which is to say there's a dumb kid who's living in St. Louis and he's on jihadi websites.
Dumb Kevin is going to join ISIS.
He's going to join ISIS. And somebody sends him an email and says, "Hey, dumb Kevin, do you want to join ISIS? Meet me at the chocolate shop." And dumb Kevin goes there. And the guy says, "Hey, you know what we should do? We should blow up this chocolate shop with a briefcase full of this explosive. What do you say?" And dumb Kevin goes, "Oh, sure." And then it's like, "Freeze, dumb Kevin."
I don't know what the bright line is for entrapment, but it seems common sense-wise, it seems to be that you should not be encouraging new crime. The law enforcement agency shouldn't be acting in such a way that crimes are going to take place that would not take place otherwise.
Well, and that is the bright line of entrapment. And entrapment is very difficult to prove as a defense.
I would say most defenses that say that law enforcement are acting badly have proved difficult to prove, right?
Very difficult to prove.
The institutions gather the wagons.
The institutions do, although the courts are interested in sort of checking police power to a certain degree when it comes to this kind of behavior, which is, and the burden of proof is it reasonable to think that the defendant would never have conceived of a crime, would never have.
You have to imagine a thought experiment.
Yeah.
What are the odds this guy actually would have?
Did this guy come up with this, or was this whole plot delivered by a federal agent?
And it's tricky because the federal agent is going to have to kind of suggest the plot, 'cause otherwise he might have done the crime, but to someone else, and then you don't get the arrest.
Right. And in the case of James Timothy Hoffman, he was not an FBI agent. He was a bad, a convicted drug distributor, and he went to them and said basically, "I bet you I can get John DeLorean," because they had some distant social connection. They'd met a couple of times.
I'm going to assume that as a hard-partying, hard-charging businessman of the 80s, John DeLorean was doing plenty of coke.
And this was also a time when cocaine was just starting to transition from the expensive and widely sort of winked at drug of rock stars
of rich
parties, and this was a kind of a designer fashion drug. We were just starting to see the cartels and the violence and the Miami
I remember
Vice.
when cocaine used to be fun.
Cocaine was just a neat thing that almost killed Stevie Nicks.
How did we make it so vulgar?
It was Miami Beach that did it.
So we are assuming here that John DeLorean was doing so much cocaine that he had to have a second carburetor installed above his nose. Is that our assumption?
That is why the hood of John DeLorean had that big bump out.
You don't want to get a vapor lock under those eyebrows.
That's why the eyebrows, right? They're there to filter the cocaine. DeLorean is what he's trying to do is make money to cover the $17 million of personal debt he's in. The DeLorean company is still, eking by. He still imagines, like so many guys that have bet it all on something, that if he can just cover this,
just turn a corner.
Yeah, just cover these interest payments, just pay off his debtors.
Just need to see a little daylight.
All he has to do is sell another 1,000 cars, and it's off to the races.
And so he
Hoffman,
probably would have, even if not for, by the way, James Timothy Hoffman is a great serial or killer or
classic
political assassin name.
Classic terrible guy name.
It's just because we're using his middle name.
James Timothy Hoffman.
So even if
Timothy is a great serial killer name, right?
Is.
Yeah.
So even if James Timothy Hoffman was not extorting him, boy, that really is a great serial killer name. Like it's like invented for Dexter or something. It's McVeigh plus. So even if he had not entrapped DeLorean presumably was already interested in trafficking some coke.
Well, so this is what hit the newspapers, and at the time, everyone rolled their eyes. I think in the popular press and the general consensus was, oh, of course, John DeLorean.
He's desperate.
And also part of this world of cocaine trafficking that we're seeing now, sort of taking down the rich or being like part of the decline and fall of the smart set.
We've seen his Italian suits.
Right.
We know what to expect.
And we imagine now that the cars themselves are part of a cocaine importation scheme. You know, there was all this oh,
really? There's cars in
just the sense,
drugs in the door panels?
Yeah, the sense that, oh, this has all got to be connected to a larger thing. And so DeLorean was more or less tried in the court of public opinion. And the DeLorean company filed for bankruptcy a couple of days after he was arrested for trafficking. But he spent the next couple of years in court trying to prove that he had been entrapped rather than nabbed. Mm-hmm. And although it didn't really make it into the press and didn't become part of the DeLorean story, and we'll see why in a second, or a suggestion why, DeLorean actually made a pretty convincing case that James Timothy Hoffman came to him and said, I can put you in touch with a group of investors that want to bail you out, and didn't mention cocaine at all. And DeLorean said, I'm $17 million in debt. What do I got to do?
I am taking all these calls.
And it was through a gradual process of like, well, meet me here. We're going to meet this group of investors, where it's like, oh, well, the investors couldn't come. They're from Colombia and they're going to put $30 million, like little by little. But ultimately, so DeLorean said that he realized something was rotten in Denmark and actually wrote a letter to his lawyer saying, I'm playing along with this guy. Don't open this letter unless they find me dead or whatever.
He is smart.
I'm going to this meeting, but I know that but I'm only going because the guy like threatened the safety of my children and whatnot. And so DeLorean's entrapment defense, which is an extremely rare victory for a sort of procedural defense like that, where you say, the cops.
This is whatever he tries, and it never works.
It never works, right? This is the 1 in 100 shot. But he actually is acquitted of the cocaine bust, and by this point in time, the DeLorean company was long insolvent, and in fact, the DeLorean company was those missing cars that we were looking for. What you asked, like what happened to those missing cars. The company was bought out of receivership by a group that took the old parts that were lying around and actually finished a bunch of cars that hadn't been. Oh. That were
how late was this? This was still in the 80s?
In the mid 80s, and and kind of little by little sold off that back catalog. That company had no intention of like reviving the DeLorean car company. They just were like, hey, we can buy all this stuff for pennies on the dollar and sell these DeLoreans for $18,000 to guys like John Roderick in 1989, who thought this would be a cool car to drive around.
If only you'd done it. What are they worth today?
Well, that's a really good question. DeLorean himself, although acquitted, then immediately was charged with embezzling money to keep up his embezzling money from the DeLorean company to support his lifestyle, and was then mired in controversy kind of for the rest of the 80s and 90s. He tried a couple of times to make a comeback selling luxury watches, and for a while he was going to he thought he could start another car company. None of it really panned out, and he eventually declared bankruptcy and had to sell off all of his luxurious properties, and died at the age of 80 in a townhouse with his much younger wife. Sort of in, he never was able to pull off that American third act where...
Well, that's interesting. You always expect people like that to even, it's the big collapse that people do just fine and still wind up with their big house in Miami or whatever.
Yeah.
But it seems like in his case, he was kind of wiped out. The cars, by the way, go for about $50,000 today.
So $50,000. I mean, if you had invested $12,000 in Apple stock in 1989,
you would have a lot more than that.
Yeah. So
I mean, if you'd had it sitting under your mattress, it would have doubled. If you'd bought X-Men comics, it would probably triple.
Unless you got BlackBerry on them.
Here's what I've learned from this story: is that if you're ever going to do a crime, make sure you send a note to your lawyer being like, "Hey, by the way, I'm not doing any crimes. Can you seal this envelope?"
What's interesting about the old note to the lawyer is it seems exceptionally easy to back engineer. Right. If I were a lawyer, I would just every day go down to the post office and have a stamped envelope canceled.
Just steam open and then have one every day
and just have a huge file of canceled envelopes.
Okay, John,
this one got mailed.
What day do you want to tell me you weren't doing any crimes? I got you covered. And that concludes the DeLorean cocaine bust. Entry 330.JB1810, certificate number 36728, in the omnibus. Futurelings, one of the other terrible inventions of our time, in addition to the DMC DeLorean, was social media. You can, only 9,000 social media platforms were made.
That's right.
All in Northern Ireland.
4 of them gold-plated.
All of them terrible. If you get them up to 88 miles per hour, you don't go back in time. You just have like a coronary. But John and I, we're accessible to our audience of well-wishers.
Accessible and susceptible.
We were susceptible. What are they trying to suscept you to?
To a cocaine bust. I mean, to a cocaine deal. If someone came to you, Ken, and said, "Look, you don't have to do cocaine, but there's a lot of money in cocaine. Why don't you turn some of your Jeopardy earnings into real money?" What would you say?
I have non-cocaine privilege. I have a stable middle-class lifestyle without having to turn to drug trafficking. So,
yeah,
I can't judge a kid with no other way out.
Sure.
It's a very different world where you can't feed your family unless you're dealing.
Absolutely.
But luckily, those were not the kind of street corners I grew up on, which is why I'm not selling you drugs right now. Except for the sweet, sweet drug of
supporting Omnibus
podcast listening. You got that twice weekly hit. You can follow us at Ken Jennings, at John Roderick, and at Omnibus Project. We have a lovely group of Facebook listeners here in our era at Facebook, the Facebook group Futurelings, and similar gatherings on Reddit and Discord. You can email us at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. You can send us things through the postal service. So the last thing I opened to you had racist memorabilia in it.
Yeah.
Had racist.
What do we got? What do we got in this one? Is it
I don't know.
Somebody's grandfather's KKK hood?
This one came from Seattle, so I think it's less likely to be.
Less likely.
It's
some
Klan paraphernalia.
Stolen Native American artifact.
Yeah, it's. The thing about opening these in real time is it's very authentic, but also that it takes a while. Wait, what is this?
What is it?
It's wrapped in a page from a Mad Libs book, which is a great wrapping paper.
That is a good one.
Because you can do the Mad Lib after you open. Well, here, I'm not going to open your gift, John.
Oh, wait. Did you get one too, or is it just me?
This one is just to you. Is this like Christmas morning where we have to alternate? I think Ralphie played Santa last year.
I feel bad about getting mail.
I think it's because you're the one that always says,
Beautifully.
send me attic stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll open this thing. This is like at the end of Christmas morning where the person with too few presents has to open like the family thing from grandma.
You get all the walnuts out of the stockings.
Let's see. But this is whatever's in this envelope.
This is beautifully
Oh
wrapped.
no. Oh, it's coins.
Uh-oh.
They're everywhere.
Oh, wait. This is a very small little leather-bound book. And the seal on the cover is the seal of the Bank of America. Oh, it's not a book, Ken. It looks like a book, but it's a piggy bank.
It's a fake book?
It's a fake book bank.
It's got a slot. So it's not the kind that opens up and there's the outline of a brandy bottle or a gun.
No, it's a... Well, I don't know what's in it. Let's see if there's something good in it. I don't have the key. But I bet I could pick this lock.
Well, we got to do the Mad Lib first.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding. We don't have to do the Mad Lib.
Long Mad Lib.
Let's do a 20-minute outro.
So what is that over there?
It's from Alita, who loves old coins. She says they're mostly for my wife. That's cool. This is stuff she found cleaning out her grandfather's house. Sorry that they kind of stink. I kind of like the smell of the smell of old coins.
I do too. Is that what they smell like, do they smell like a dead raccoon?
No, they smell kind of like the many hands they've passed through.
Yeah, that's a great smell. What are the coins? You know a little bit of numismatic.
Here's a
history?
sample one. It's a 1975 Mexican 1 peso piece.
All right.
There's a few of those. This is an aluminum Chinese 1 yuan or I can't see the year.
So this
renminbi.
is really just what was in the jar on her grandfather's dresser.
Yes, here's Chilean 10 peso piece. Here's 10 francs. Which kind of franc? A French franc. That's lovely. It's kind of got a deco design, this 1977 franc. These are lovely. More pesos, more PRC money. Jingle jingle. Some kind of Canadian aluminum dime. No, it's heavier. From 86. Thank you so much for the stinky coins.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. We love that stuff.
Does your daughter like coins? Would she like these?
I have a jar of coins from around the world that I keep that has all kinds of stuff like that, but I bet you there are some in that pile that I don't have.
And when you opened up your piggy bank book, what was
well,
there?
I haven't yet
okay.
because I actually do have a kind of master key for old piggy banks.
Have you thought of putting a couple of these old coins into it?
Well, I don't know.
Combine your two gifts.
I don't know if there's something in there right now that maybe doesn't want a bunch of old coins on it. There might be a kind of, for all I know,
plastique.
There's a genie in here. Whoa, Ken.
Yeah, I'm right here, John.
Ken, I found the key to the lock. It was in a little bag. And I don't know how it got, you threw it over here and I thought it was just a nothing. But
you thought it was drugs.
I did. I thought you were sending me another bag of drugs. But look, it's a homemade key. This is not a key. This is a key that someone fashioned with a pair of snips.
Just to match the lock?
I guess. I don't know how you... it's not a complicated key, as you can see. But the little bank...
And then what's in the bank then?
All right, the key fits weirdly, but it pops open. It is a bank, and there's a note inside, as I suspected. It says, and this is written in that wonderful sort of half cursive, half printing that so many of us adopted after we were...
There wasn't Danielian. We weren't being taught it.
Right.
We just only learned half of each alphabet.
It says, "Hey, old man, this vintage faux book piggy bank seems right up your alley." People use that phrase a lot with me. This seems right up your alley.
You have a very wide and accessible alley.
My alley is full of stuff because all of this stuff goes right up it.
And it's easy to imagine your alley because none of these people have ever been there, and yet they know what can be found up it.
They're like, I saw this thing and I can picture this being in John's alley, and you're not wrong. I hope it brings you pleasure, says our correspondent. It comes with a working key, although obviously not the original. Now, this is written in the letter that was inside the bank.
Thank you for that explanation, sir.
So
where was it 5 minutes ago when John was trying to open that thing?
So the fact that the note specifies that it has a working key, I think is going to be self-evident to me. And then it's signed in like much more elegant cursive than the letter is written. Happy birthday, Dawn, D-A-W-N. So this is from Dawn, and she has written this note on a piece of, she's done the thing where you take a piece of wrapping paper that's looks like a William Morris print, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. The box was wrapped in something similar, I think.
So it's like William Morris wallpaper, and there's my little safe, which is so great.
And was there anything inside it besides the note?
No.
Then what are you going to put in it?
Well, I'm going to put that.
Put all the weird money people keep sending us.
I'm going to put the 1 million Turkish lira note in it because that's my other favorite thing.
So what are you gonna put in there?
I'm probably gonna use it as the bank where I keep all the weird coins and bills and other fake money that people send us.
Perfect.
Which happens all the time.
It's burglar proof.
Burglar proof. You have to make your own key to
They're gonna break in here and they're gonna not know how to. They're gonna be like, well, here's a little book he reads, but where's his fake money?
That's the sound of it locking.
Anyway, if you'd like to send us weird stuff and have us be puzzled by it in real time, you can send it to P.O. Box 55744. Shoreline, Washington, 98155. There are many ways to contribute to the ongoing success of the show just by listening. Honestly, you're doing more than most people. So well done, 1%ers.
Hear, hear.
You can always recommend the show, review the show, listen to John's other shows. He sounds like he needs the money. He's pondering a $25 million Coke deal.
I appreciate every penny.
But you can contribute materially to Omnibus if your budget allows at patreon.com/Omnibus Project. And enjoy being part of the supporter community and the perks attached, like a monthly addenda show or a video feed of all the weird mail we open and show notes and whatnot. In fact, this week's show about the DMC DeLorean was suggested by a Patreon donor.
Oh, isn't that interesting,
Matt?
I had no idea. You just slipped that note under my pillow.
you thought I was just telling you to do a show about the DMC DeLorean?
Psst, DeLorean.
Now, Matt, because he donates at the, I can't remember what the levels are. Sentient Aspen level? No, you get to suggest a show at the the fourth tier, which is, I can't even remember. Is it something about robots, John?
Robots.
Whatever the fourth tier is.
The fourth tier.
It sounds like we're Scientologists. If you're a level 4
That's
Thetan,
right. Get to the fourth tier and unlock the gate.
Then you unlock the secret of being able to suggest a show topic every 12 months. And thank you, Matt. Matt suggested the DMC DeLorean, but you thought it should be more about cocaine, so you called an audible there.
Yeah, well, generally, if somebody sends me a suggestion, the tendency is to suggest things like World War II.
Have you thought of doing a show on World War II?
World War II, and then I think, well, that's a little bit too either broad or narrow.
Or not enough cocaine, your usual critique.
But if there's cocaine, if you can have a cocaine angle, like Nietzsche's sister, I almost was going to introduce the cocaine angle, but then you seem to have covered it. Did a nice show.
Should it have had more cocaine in your mind?
I can't imagine an omnibus episode that wouldn't be improved by adding a little cocaine.
It is the washing bear level, by the way.
Oh.
But there are other more attainable levels where you can have fun stuff like autographed show notes mailed to you, or again, the monthly bonus episode and or the Patreon video feed. Thank you so much to our well over 1,000 supporters, 1,672 patrons as I record this, who make Omnibus a going concern. Otherwise, the last show would have been whatever it was last fall when we left iHeartMedia.
Can you imagine if we were still on iHeartMedia?
This year has been rough enough without Omnibus to put wind beneath our wings.
Can you imagine? Ugh, I think about it all the time.
Thank you for
Wake
all
up
you
in a
do,
sweat.
Patreoners.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived or how much of it was powered by terribly cut cocaine filled with baby laxative.
I'm just addicted to baby laxative. I hate that they keep cutting it with cocaine.
We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.